Hello, I'm Martin Katz. Welcome to the Katz & Co podcast, where I'm going to try and demystify some cross-border tax planning between here, the Isle of Man, and the UK, and also focus on life on our wonderful island here in the Isle of Man. So today we're going to tackle a myth that we hear far too often, which is I've left the UK, so I've left my UK inheritance tax problems behind. If only. Sadly not. If you're a former UK resident now living in the Isle of Man, particularly if you've moved recently, say since April, you are probably still in the net. In fact, for IHT purposes, you're probably going to be subject to UK inheritance tax for 10 years after you leave the UK. So in this short video, we're going to cover that 10-year inheritance tax tail after you leave the UK. We're going to look at which assets, UK assets, can still trigger your IHT in the UK, even if you're no longer a resident there. And we're going to look at some planning strategies that can still work and some that don't. And finally, we're going to quickly cover how you can shed your IHT exposure completely over time. So let's begin with the 10-year tail. So under the old rules, which were before April 2025, if you were UK domiciled or deemed domiciled, you were liable to IHT on your worldwide assets. But if you left the UK for good, you could then shed your UK IHT obligations after just 3 years of non-residence. This is assuming you were going to leave for good and could evidence that. The new rules are purely residence-based now and mean that you need to be non-resident of the UK for 10 years out of 20 to be personally outside the UK inheritance tax net. So if you've moved from the UK to the island and you're thinking of doing so, for the first 10 years of your Isle of Man residency, then unfortunately a death certificate will still drag your estate into the UK inheritance tax regime. So I mentioned that there were some assets which are always going to keep you hooked into the UK inheritance tax system even after that 10-year period has gone. And these are what we call the UK situs assets. So specifically, this is UK property, UK-based funds, certain shareholdings, UK bank accounts will always be within the UK IHT net. The exposure on shares and funds and bank accounts can be relatively easily dealt with using an Isle of Man holding company. And the good news is that once you are here and you're not subject to UK CGT anymore, capital gains tax, then you can gift those assets to a third party or to an investment company without actually triggering a CGT charge, which you couldn't do if you were still subject to UK CGT. So there's some real advantages straight away from that perspective. So the real problem is the UK real estate, because you'll either need to accept that potential exposure or sell it and invest the proceeds in other assets. Also, don't forget that from April 27, UK pension death benefits, which were previously outside the UK IHT scope, will be brought inside, which I think you'll agree is a very big change indeed. So, what can you do now? What planning is still going to work after you've moved? So it's an obvious point, but once you've moved to the island, the usual UK IHT strategies still work. So this is what you should be looking at for those first 10 years in the unfortunate event that something might happen to you during that period. So the obvious one is potentially exempt transfer gifts. As I mentioned before, there's some CGT advantages for those. So in respect of that, you can make a gift, and if you live 7 years, that gift is outside your estate, and that's the same if you're resident here in the Isle of Man. So that's a good way of reducing the value of your estate, but obviously it does rely on you surviving for 7 years, although there is some taper after 3. The other thing you can do is you can help your loved ones out with normal expenditure out of income, things like school fees and so on. There's no 7-year clock on those if they're regular and if they're documented, so that's always a good thing to do. Um, Business property relief is still worth considering. It's still valuable, but it is going to be capped at £1 million from April 26, unfortunately. Life insurance arrangements, you can use a whole of life policy and trust, which can cover the inheritance tax bill without selling any assets. So that's definitely worth considering as well. And then finally, of course, there's the other tried and tested techniques which will also work and should definitely be explored. And by that, I'm thinking of things like discounted gift trusts, loan trusts, family investment companies, and so on and so forth. So just to recap, there's things that don't work or going to need rethinking. So the UK property directly is the obvious one. That's always going to be caught for UK IHT. There's no way around it. So you are going to have to sell that or just accept the charge. The UK ISAs, bank accounts, etc. You can put them into an Isle of Man holding company and so on, but because they're not IHT exempt otherwise. And also, you need to think about doing something with your pension. And we can definitely, if you move here, talk to us about your pension because we can definitely help you look at that and see if there are any options for you. So, in terms of actually leaving shedding your UK IHT exposure completely, well, the first thing you're going to do, as I mentioned, is you're going to have to leave the UK for those years and play out that, let that tail play out basically. So moving somewhere beautiful like the Isle of Man is a good thing to do. The nice thing about here is, of course, that we're not at all far from the UK, so it's quite easy for you to travel across and go and see loved ones and so on. We've got regular flights to London and Liverpool and Manchester and Birmingham and so on. So moving is one thing, and then also you'll need to look at those UK situs assets and deal with them appropriately, and also the pension as well, of course. So, in summary, that's really what you need to look at. If you need any help with any of that, we'd be very happy to talk. We don't charge for an initial consultation, and I will look forward to hearing from you.